Ho, 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 and welcome to TeleGeography Explains the Internet, the show that explores the business behind all of the ways that humans stay connected around the world. I'm your host, Greg Bryan, and for this month, aka Chris Kringle. And in this special end of the year episode, we are wrapping up our telecom year in review series with maybe the hottest topic of the past year, maybe even couple years, and that is data centers, cloud, and of course, AI. But first, if you haven't yet, go back and listen to our first two episodes on transport trends and pricing in enterprise networks, as well as we weave in a lot of the themes that we talked about in those episodes to these final two interviews. So today, our telegeography experts are John Hjembo and Patrick Christian, and they've joined me to answer all of your burning questions about the data center and AI booms. We're going to be answering questions like just how many data center projects were we tracking in 25 and what do we expect for 2026? And where geographically are a lot of these projects located around the world? What kind of constraints are those projects encountering? And are the rumors of a bubble warranted? Now, in the cloud world, we'll explore questions like, with all of this expansion, did we see an increase or a decrease in cloud region development in 2025? And what might be surprising about the geographic location of many cloud region developments that we saw in 25 and planned for the future? Are CDNs still relevant in this hyperscaler dominated world? And is long-haul bandwidth demand really all that massive yet, given the demands of AI? We will answer all of these questions and more. But first, if you're enjoying the show, please rate and subscribe. Just take a moment to rate us on your favorite platform and subscribe so that you never miss an episode. If you found this discussion or others insightful, please tell a friend or a colleague to give it a listen. And of course, as always, I'd love to hear from you. Find me on LinkedIn as Greg Bryan to share your suggestions for future topics or feedback on today's episode. Okay, on to the interviews. But first, happy holidays and a very happy new year. Welcome to our special end of the year podcast session. John, as Santa Claus, I love that you have a little Christmas tree behind you.
A little Christmas tree. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So thanks. Thanks for helping us end the year with some Christmas cheer.
Yes.
John,
and thank you for being Santa. I mean, that's very meaningful as well.
My pleasure, of course. This has been the year of the data center, John. I have heard, regular pundits that talk about politics and economics and things on other podcasts I listen to for a general audience talk about data centers this year, which was weird, right? Because it's usually something that is in our little corner of the world. I'm just going to start out very broad here. Was this one, you've been covering data centers for, I don't know, at least a decade, correct me, around there. Was this maybe the biggest year you've had in that sense?
Yeah, I think I can confidently say this is by far the biggest year I've ever seen. And I've been doing this for more than 15 years. And frankly, it's a little bit exhausting, I mean, you wake up every morning, you look at the news and it's like, oh, okay, another multi-billion dollar project. And that seems to have gone on for, weeks on end, every single day, one project bigger than the next. So it's been an absolutely huge year. It's so much to keep up with.
And the kind of thing as an analyst where just as you've done some analysis, some bean counting, it's all wrong again on an ongoing basis. Right? So, yeah. All right. So I don't envy you there, but I do in the sense that it's fun to be on charge of a hot topic, right? So,
it is. Yeah, it's gratifying. Yeah, there's been a lot. And it's been so much to keep up with. I mean, right now, I think what we have in our database is about 650 sites in the immediate pipeline, which is just absurdly huge number. And
compare that, if you would, to a standard year. Like we're talking tenfold, right?
Yeah, well, typically we have a lot on an ongoing basis, but I'd say this is probably at least double what we normally have,
Mm-hmm.
and so it's very very significant. We've
Yeah.
gone from a pipeline list of maybe 300 to more than 650.
Got it.
Um, yeah, it's been
And even
crazy.
even at that, so that's numbers of projects, but the
Numbers
projects
of
that are being
individual data
announced,
centers.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah, the
right.
projects that are being
That's even
announced
more.
are of a much greater scale, right? So,
Right. And that really, I mean, so on the back end, we keep track of projects that are announced, but not, we don't publish the ones that haven't yet been started, and
mhm.
that list is just absolutely exploded. You're right. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, interesting. All right, so let's talk about this sort of global, massive infrastructure investment. Everything else that we sort of touch on telegeography has kind of very similar concerns. There's fiber, you have to dig trenches, there's some infrastructure involved there. Backbones, laying submarine cables, that those are real physical projects, but none quite on the scale of data centers, where you're really involving things that don't usually, in fiber development, we have rights of way. We don't have massive real estate investments. We don't have other infrastructure going to these investments, like roads and new power plants and things like that. Just take me through the kinds of constraints that this is going to put on the world developing all of these massive new data centers.
Yeah. I mean, it's a lot. So maybe to start with where we're seeing a lot of this infrastructure development taking off, and then
Yeah, please.
we
Yeah.
could talk about some of the constraints that everyone is facing. What's really interesting is that this particular phase is so heavily concentrated in the U.S., but it's
Mhm.
not just in the U.S. So here we are, telegeography um, covering interconnection hubs, and this is one of our
Mhm.
really really big themes right now with the fairly recent launch of our market connectivity score,
Right.
with our geography WAN benchmark work and things like that. We're kind of piecing together all these different digital infrastructure pieces to talk about the strengths of interconnection markets, but in this particular data center economy. So much of the building that's happening is in markets that are not digital hubs.
Right.
So it's not just in the US, but it's in like places that you wouldn't expect in the US.
Mhm.
So, I'd say right now, when you look at overall commercial data center builds, it's there's a pretty good spread throughout the globe.
Mhm.
The US is still kind of the heaviest concentration. Maybe about 35% of all new builds are in the US. But when you
Mhm.
look specifically on the hyperscale side and on the side servicing the AI economy, it goes up to more than 60% of all builds are happening in the US. So it
I
just
see.
gets
I see.
way
Yeah.
more concentrated when it
Yeah.
comes to
Mhm.
when we talk about these really big projects, the AI training related projects and things like that, heavily concentrated in the US. And then you start looking at the specific locations, and and you're suddenly looking at not New York or Northern Virginia. You're looking at West Texas.
Right.
You're looking
And
at
that's
Columbus,
for,
Ohio.
like,
Um,
these things that I'm talking about, these constraints, that
yeah,
for the reasons of real estate, power, et cetera.
yeah, yeah. So I mean, and yeah, that has a lot to do with it. Yeah, so you're not constrained by needing to be where the eyeballs are. You have greater flexibility when it comes to latency for either cloud applications or for AI training.
Mhm.
And so you're looking at where there is power, and yeah, so to get to so yeah, a lot of it is driven by where these constraints are. Some of it's being driven by geopolitical
Mhm.
interests as well.
There's
So
fewer NIMBYs in West Texas than there are in Loudoun County.
yeah,
I
there's
live in
that.
Loudoun County, right? And there's a big,
Yeah,
fight about additional power lines coming over the pristine
yeah.
mountains,
Oh,
right? This,
yeah,
so
absolutely.
avoiding
Yeah,
all that, I can see being very appealing, right?
yeah, yeah. I mean, so like West Texas, you have direct access to like gobs of natural gas,
Hmm.
and you have more. There's a lot more proactive movement to get data center deployments. Um, as close to power generation as possible, or as close to transmission as possible where there's abundance. So yeah, that is driving everything. But then, on the other hand, part of the geopolitical thing too is where you can get the chips sent for training, and
Right.
so operators who may have been moving. So thinking internationally for a moment, operators that might have been looking at one country are suddenly saying, "Wait a minute, I can't get as many NVIDIA chips as I need in that country. So I need to scale up over here instead." And so then we start seeing other weird locations popping up, like multiple projects in Saudi Arabia, for example, where we have these geopolitical deals going on, and you can get access to the NVIDIA chips. So
I mean, they also have fuel in Saudi Arabia.
and they have fuel,
So,
yeah. And so they're building their own platform, which called Humane, which take that as you will.
sounds kind of Orwellian.
I was going to say dystopian. Well, and fun fact, Humane is owned by the Saudi investment fund, which is run by MBS himself. So there you go.
Interesting.
Yeah. So they have access to NVIDIA chips, and so there are a lot of projects happening there too. But
is some of the geography also forced by the data sovereignty issues, right? So with a lot of these AI models, you have to have
absolutely.
the data they're using have legal issues of staying within the country borders and whatnot, right? So
yeah, and what's interesting about that though is that's not necessarily driving the training development as much as you would think it is. I mean, in Europe, we have lots of data sovereignty issues, but there's not a ton of AI training development. They're really, really, really behind compared to the US and some of our other partner countries. And I've heard varying reasons for that. A lot of it may be because of the number of jurisdictions that you have to pass through from one country to the next, and
it's
dealing
just too
with
frustrating.
different sovereignty issues.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
it's like until we actually get to the application stage where we're doing inference, do the training somewhere where things are more predictable.
That makes sense.
But then going back to the power and land thing, I mean this is absolutely huge. And to speak briefly about Europe, I mean we've gone from a situation where a lot of fossil fuel production has been shut down, and now they're desperately trying to spin things back up again because they're realizing we're in a crisis situation when it comes to provisioning power for this stuff. And I was looking at some of the pipeline development and the amount of demand for power that's related to the data center industry, and just looking at a couple of stats there, like so global average for power consumption that's accounted for by data centers is roughly 3%. And that varies widely from one place to the next. In some places, it's much higher than that.
I was going to say, I reckon Loudoun County's balance is a little bit different there.
More like at least 20%, right?
Yeah.
And so, and looking right now at what's in the pipeline in Northern Virginia, a great example. We have roughly 1.7 gigawatts planned in data center development, and of course, this is in a market that doesn't even have transmission capacity for it, right? But you look at the amount of power development, power generation that's being planned, and the amount of data center capacity planned accounts for more than 20% of what's coming online. On the power side. In Columbus, where there's tons and tons of development happening, there's even more, believe it or not, even more data center power planned, more like 1.8 gigawatts.
Wow.
And that accounts for about 13% of all power planned there. Mumbai, looking at Asia for a second, is one of the hottest markets in the world right now. And India in general, actually. But how far can you go when how far can this go possibly when you're looking at a situation where you have about 200 megawatts planned in the Mumbai region, and that accounts for more than a quarter of all the power planned for that region.
My goodness. Yeah.
So how far can this possibly go?
And it's going to
and
become politically dicey at a point
yeah.
where, when consumers' electricity prices are going up, or there's brownouts, right?
So
Things like that. Like,
speaking of which, so and you're going to love this one as a Northern Virginia guy. I was at a conference in September, and during this one presentation, the first slide this guy put up was a slide about from PJM. So the company that manages power for Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia, parts of Illinois, and a bunch of other places. So it's the biggest power market in the world, and
right.
Northern Virginia is a very key part of it. Um, so a couple of really fun stats for you. So they're going from 4% reserve capacity in the very near future to 1%,
Wow.
which
Yeah.
which then
That's
gets to the
dangerous.
high risk of brownouts, blackouts.
Yeah. Hmm.
And at the same time, for that wonderful level of service, you're going to get 11 times higher wholesale electricity pricing
Yeah.
by 2027. And, we're
Hmm.
starting to see the effects of that already. Now, that doesn't, wholesale prices are
Not one to one
constantly in
with
flux,
retail.
and
Or
they're
yeah.
not at
Yeah.
all one to one with retail. But
Hmm.
that's certainly,
They
that
can't
sounds
have
like a
no
crisis.
relationship, right?
No,
Yeah.
it doesn't.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
No, and especially
Yeah.
at such an exaggerated level, that certainly is going to hit hard,
Hmm.
across the board.
So, John, you might have seen on our company Slack channel, our boss Tim Strong lives in the same political district as I do. We both live in Northern Virginia, and we just had elections a few months ago, a couple months ago, and our state congressperson was up for reelection, and I promise you, the contest was mainly about who hated data centers more.
That's
Like that is
amazing.
like, yeah. So
That's
I'm
just
just
spectacular.
as a note to the industry that this is going to be in Ashburn is not the same as the rest of the country, obviously, right? You know what I mean? But
Yeah.
there's no doubt that this is top of mind with people well outside the industry.
Yep. Yep. And everyone is, and here in Maryland, everyone is, has these signs out that say no imminent domain for corporate gain.
There you go.
And
Yeah.
everyone knows that these power lines that are coming in are feeding data centers in Northern Virginia. Everyone knows it.
Yep. Yep.
And nobody
Exactly.
stands for it. So same issue here, but you're obviously even closer to home.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Okay, so that's the wild world in terms of these projects that are all coming online. We'll leave aside other big issues because we don't have tons of time, right?
Yeah.
About like just how long projects like this take, right? How complicated they can be, that sort of thing. But then I also think the most of us at telegeography, right, are thinking more about networks, most of the time, right? We love your work on data centers and tying it all together. And that's where I often go with all of this is that if you're moving the way from Ashburn, the reason that Ashburn is Ashburn goes all the way back to May East in Tyson's Corner in like the 80s, I think, right? You know what I mean?
Hmm.
And there being a conglomeration of networks that was attractive to the nascent data center industry.
Yeah.
If you move the data centers away from those networks, then we're creating a different problem, which is networks problems, right? So, you mentioned West Texas, for example. I remember seeing one in Eastern Washington, right, where there's just no one has ever built big fiber routes to these places because there hasn't been a need to. So, take me through a little bit of that this year, because you're also, when you're in doing our data center research, you're looking at fiber connectivity into these facilities and things like that, right? So, is this creating a problem? Is that relatively easy to solve? What do you see there?
Yeah, and this is a little harder for me to speak to, only in that it tends to be a little bit more opaque as to
Hmm.
how problems being solved. I
Right.
think I think when it comes to like who's building the major projects where, uh, so several of these companies, um, just build their own fiber.
I was gonna say, surely they're
It's
thinking
not a
about this.
problem.
It's
Yeah,
not
it's not
like
a
it's 15 years ago where it's like, oh
they're
right,
not
yeah,
constrained by that, and they're
yeah,
not going to announce where they're building and how much, but they're building
right.
their own. And
That's
then, but
interesting. So,
then,
so just to make that clear, then what they have is the assets in the ground, and then
yeah,
they're maybe going to lease. They're not going to sell lit service, but they'll lease dark fiber or even sell fiber pairs to
sure,
providers who then will light it and that sort of thing. So
yeah,
that's a
and,
sort of different model in some respects, right?
right. And I mean, there are very few carriers who have the 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 technical know-how, the capacity, um, and the I would say the lack of fear to
Mm,
pursue massive new fiber builds,
right, right.
and on routes that aren't traditionally known.
It's a
You
big
hear
capex
announcements. Yeah, it's huge
expenditure. It's like,
capex.
yeah.
There's lots of potential for um, um, capex to balloon,
Hmm.
and so there are very few companies um, that have what it takes to build these kinds of projects out. So it's a matter of either the data centers building their own, or a very few companies um, uh, adding significant routes between like data center
Hmm.
hubs and major
Hmm.
markets.
Right.
And so you see some announcements from companies like Zayo, of course, being probably the primary one
Lumen,
that
I
is
think, as
building on
well.
these
Certainly,
kinds of
yeah.
routes. Lumen as
Hmm.
well. And from what little I've heard, the real challenge then when it comes to like the telecom world is that on these routes where your Lumens and your Zayos are building, are adding new capacity, it's just being taken up immediately by these hyperscalers.
Interesting.
And
Right.
so smaller enterprises or carriers who need to lease capacity for
There's
diversity,
nothing there.
even on the same routes, there's nothing for them.
Yeah.
So that's probably the biggest issue that I've
And
heard
the
about.
hyperscalers, from what I understand, are sometimes doing this speculatively. So it's not like,
Right. Yeah.
because
It's
you
not like they
can,
need it right
yeah,
away.
yeah, but they just
Yeah.
want to have
Well,
that asset, not to worry
yeah.
about it when, yeah.
So the other effect that we're starting to hear about is that I don't know if anyone's told you this term yet, but the new term is neocloud.
Neocloud,
Uh,
like as in
so
the not hyperscalers, but
right,
the open AI and those kind of folks, right?
yeah,
Is
and
that, yeah.
CoreWeave and Nscale and Caruso,
Hmm.
these kinds of companies. So they're the new builders. They're not
Hmm.
nearly at the scale of the big hyperscalers
But they
that
want to
that
be.
drive the whole market.
Yeah.
But they're
Yeah.
starting to get it. So on the
Yeah.
telecom side, the thing that we're starting to observe is that they're dipping their feet into the water a little bit. They're starting to
Hmm.
show up
Hmm.
at our sorts of telecom conferences, and they're starting to
ITW and
be, yeah, they're
PTC and things
starting to
like
show
that. Like,
interest in buying
yeah,
some level of capacity on some major routes.
that is
But even
interesting.
there, it's
Yeah.
like, it's we don't know how speculative that is. If
Hmm.
they
Hmm.
need it immediately, or if it's something that they think that they're hedging for in terms of future need.
This is what's interesting about it to me, and we don't need to go too far down this road. And I've mentioned this probably in every one of these episodes I've done. Right, so, when these all get stitched together, people are just going to hear me talk about this over and over again. But it's that it seems to me that we still really don't have a fix on, even close, like where AI, especially in the enterprise, there's consumer stuff so far. It's like a little dribble of, like, large language
Yeah,
models. That's not massive bandwidth demand at the enterprise level. What is available now is the same kind of tools, just enterprise grade. It's not looking to be like justifying all this like massive build. I know you need different. It's between data centers is a different
yeah,
story than inferencing, but even still, what we don't know is what AI is going to do, right? And
yeah. That's
so
right.
there's some speculation here. Obviously, they know more about their needs than we do, right? And so you tend to just think, okay, well,
Yeah,
they're anticipating like massive, and by all means, that makes sense. Once these models are trained, they become agentic. They start trading data with each other. You can very much see how that
yeah.
gets exponential quickly. But the truth is, we just don't have a fix on that time scale, exactly what it
No.
looks like. I don't hear anyone who seems to, sort of really see what the end goal looks like.
Well, what's even scarier is that they we don't even really know um, ultimately how we're going to go about getting there.
Right.
It's like the models that we're using now, the investments that we're putting in now, they may change. like the fundamental way that we're going about it may change. So it's like
Precisely.
you
Yeah.
don't know what it's not only do you not know what the end applications are and what the returns on those investments are going to be,
Hmm.
but you don't know if you're going to be going about it the same way.
Yes.
And right
Yes.
now we have, this. I know this is really maddening for a lot of developers. We have this situation where everything's being built on brute force models, where
Right.
in order to scale more, you need to get more
More
capacity
compute. Yeah.
and
That's
more
why we
compute,
have
and you need
water cooled GPUs and
yeah,
all of this, because they're throwing
bigger and
like,
bigger models, more and more
yeah,
power.
yeah.
And not only that, but as NVIDIA keeps coming up with new generations of chipsets, you have people swapping out the old generations for the new
Hmm.
ones. So as
Hmm.
soon as something new is developed, it changes not just what you're using, but how you support what you're using. You get into higher and higher density racks. You have to retrofit to support increasingly evolving chipset
Right. Right.
models. So yeah, there's huge capital outlays. There's lots of uncertainty in terms of how sustainable your current investments are going to be in getting you where you need to go, and then you don't even know
Hmm.
ultimately where you're going. So yeah, that's fun.
Yeah, and this touches on a theme that I bring up on the podcast very often, which is in the way I always like to say it, the age old kind of, when someone draws you a schematic map and there's a cloud on it, the cloud is the part they don't want to talk about right now, right? So that there's something happening in there that we don't need to talk about, and I think that's really writ large with the whole AI situation, where we're thinking of AI, the world is, as this set of software based tools. Um, and what it really represents are the kinds of things that we've been talking about, which is physical infrastructure
Yeah,
that is difficult to develop, causes real world issues, right? You know what I mean? So there, that in a certain respect is like pumping the brakes, maybe even on AI development, which is partly why there's all these announcements, why they want to get massive amounts of fiber and just hold on to it even if they don't know they need it yet or whatever, is that you're trying to avoid the physical realities being the bottleneck of this development, right? You know what I mean? So I
yeah,
think that's the part that's obviously more interesting for us at telegeography, because it's how we view the world, right? As the physical infrastructure of this, but also because there's just so many unknowns of how these two sort of things play out, like the development of the tools, what the tools look like, what resources they require, and then can those resources, from hanging fiber on poles or digging trenches to get, like the availability of chips, to
yeah.
water usage, to power usage, all of these things have to kind of work together, and it becomes a lot more complicated than I think a lot of people are aware of.
Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah, no,
So,
I mean, yeah. And I talked to my wife about this stuff. She says, if people had any idea about the side of this that you guys talk about
mhm,
all day long in the infrastructure side, they'd be absolutely amazed
yeah.
at the amount of brute force work going on, the amount of resources being depleted, the amount of
Mhm,
scarcity.
yeah.
People have no idea.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, you think, our colleague Paul and I were talking about this the other day. You think about just something simple like, there are, very specialized equipment that go into things like power transformers, right? And there's only so many factories and so many engineers who even know how to make those things, and they're used to a certain amount of orders, and you can't exceed that, right? You
yeah,
know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
you can't like just come up with more, power transmission devices, right? That it is a very specialized kind of complex thing, and I think that we're going to see that become increasingly important to this development of what we're thinking of as like more the development of the technology itself. So, John, we're running low on time. I have to ask you, and I apologize as an analyst to an analyst, but everyone wants to know: is this a bubble?
is this a
How do you
bubble?
how do you answer that question? Because I know you're getting asked that question.
Yes. Well, of course, I am no finance
Right.
professional, nor am I a soothsayer or anything
Yes.
like that. But
Well, I
honestly,
have a saying. I'll
mm,
preface this by saying I
yeah,
have a saying that I often do say in the show, which is that when I ask someone, what their view of the future is to speculate, the more sure that they are correct, the less likely I am to believe them. So,
oh no,
yeah, so you always do
gotcha,
have to hedge your bets, right?
yeah. Well, this is this is what I'd say. I mean, if it's gotten to a point where by very, very fundamental measures of what a bubble is, even a layman like me or you
Hmm.
can see that these measures are these metrics are being crossed. Then
Right.
you'd have to be very, very um, uh, you'd have to assume that we must be in some kind of a bubble.
Hmm.
And the couple of things that I would probably highlight, we're starting to see debt financing where we wouldn't see it before.
This has
Um,
been really interesting.
yeah, right.
There's this recursive sort of financing going on too, which is
Yeah,
also
well,
a lot.
so yeah, I'll get into
Yeah,
that. That's
yeah, yeah,
bigger.
yeah.
But the debt financing thing. So Meta's doing debt financing for its Hyperion campus in Louisiana,
Hmm.
27 billion in debt from Blue Owl, 2.5 billion in equity from PIMCO. So
Mm,
that's unusual.
indeed.
I just saw an article today in the Tech Capital about Ascenti, which is Digital Realty's company in Brazil or in Latin
Hmm.
America as a whole.
Hmm.
They were
Hmm.
talking about Brazil specifically, but they were saying that they're going to start doing different kinds of financing, and
Hmm.
they're going to be doing longer term loans than they typically do now. And they're going to start doing asset backed securitization for projects that are $1 billion or more, which
Mm,
isn't common in Brazil.
yeah.
So you're starting to see some of that. But yeah, going to what you were alluding to, the far more glaring issue is this circular investment craziness that's going on all over the place. You have all kinds of messy partnerships involving a few companies. Microsoft, OpenAI, Oracle, NVIDIA, Anthropic, and others. You have NVIDIA investing in OpenAI so that
Hmm.
OpenAI will buy gobs of NVIDIA chips. You have
Yes.
NVIDIA
Yeah.
investing in CoreWeave, where OpenAI is also a major customer and investor. You have Microsoft investing in OpenAI. So basically, you have lots of this, absolute guaranteed pipeline, because one company will invest in another, so that it guarantees demand for the investor. I'll invest in you so you can buy from me, that sort of thing. But then what's really scary is that this is what's driving the broader economy. So this isn't just
Indeed.
driving an AI bubble,
This is what's
most
holding
likely.
the whole
I
stock
won't
market
say
up.
for
I
sure, but
Yeah.
most likely driving an AI bubble. But it's possibly driving an entire economic bubble because
Right.
we look at H1 2025, and they estimate that as much as 1% of the overall GDP growth, maybe even more, was accounted for by AI. And this in a time
Hmm.
period where overall growth was only about 1.6%. So the economy was basically flat, except for this economy that's being driven by all these circular investments and by this lack of real clarity on ultimately where we're going and how we're going to get there.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
So,
I heard this number recently. I don't even know if this is still accurate, but that Nvidia alone accounts for something like 8% of the S&P 500 right now. That
ooh,
is bonkers.
yeah,
Right? Yeah.
that's pretty scary.
Yeah. 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 This is going to be an interesting year, 2026, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. I
So
think so.
so I'll make you keep your sort of Nostradamus hat on just a little bit longer. We've seen this like massive boom in 2025. Do you think that continues apace in 26? Does it have to slow down soon for some of the reasons we've been talking about, just like literal like resource exhaustion?
Mm. Yeah, and who knows? I mean,
Hmm.
this will probably steamroll ahead and still until something that we can't foresee stops it dead in its tracks, perhaps.
Yeah.
But as far as we can tell, it looks like more investments, lots more announcements in the U.S. and in global countries where we have these alliances and open export agreements for training chips. So we're going to start seeing, you will see more and more investment there. Ultimately, the evolution of this, if unhindered, starts to shift more towards the inference side too, in which
Hmm.
case we'll see more announcements that will be at a smaller scale, incorporated into existing campuses and existing markets as you get closer to the end user eyeballs. And so
Right.
it won't be necessarily as dramatic, but perhaps no less impactful. In the
Hmm.
sense that you're going to be driving more demand to markets that are already very, very constrained.
Hmm.
So we'll start to see more of that, and of course, in general, more power constraints, more worries about sustaining growth in really hot markets, and hopefully, probably more announcements about really interesting power agreements, working with energy generation,
Right.
and moving further towards long term solutions that'll hopefully make this a bit more sustainable in the long run.
Yeah, yeah. You touched on a lot there. One that I would put a pin in is the kind of edge issue that we didn't talk about at all. But as you said, as inferencing becomes, the big thing rather than just training, which is kind of where we are now, then edge all of a sudden becomes massively more important. And we've thought about all these massive sort of training facilities, if you will, the large central data centers, but we're going to need a lot, possibly compute that's much closer to the eyeballs, depending on how these models work, if they're very latency sensitive. So we might have to get a check in on that as
Yeah,
the world moves on. We'll be looking at a diffuse data center boom instead of a massive data center boom, right? So yeah,
yeah, I think so.
interesting.
I think so.
Excellent. All right. Well, lots to keep you busy, John. I hope you're keeping up. So,
I'm trying.
good
Yeah,
luck with that. Yeah. Thanks
yeah.
for
Thanks. I'll need
taking
it.
time out of your busy schedule to pontificate with me.
Yeah, pleasure. Thanks for having
All
me.
right. Cheers.
Up next, Patrick Christian tackles the cloud.
Welcome back onto the show, Patrick.
Great to be back, Greg.
And I should say, you are sitting in Tokyo right now. So we're doing this. It is truly amazing and never stops amazing me that I am recording a live conversation looking at your face while you are in Tokyo and I am in Virginia. That is pretty cool.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. Pretty
Yeah.
crazy.
And, obviously we're here to talk about what makes all of that work. Right? So you're going to talk about what was interesting in the general cloud world in 2025. And obviously AI was what we were all talking about all year. It almost gets tiresome, but then there's always something new to talk about and something interesting there. But obviously, let's talk about hyperscalers. We'll maybe
Uh-huh.
leave aside like neo clouds and introduce that kind of concept later. But let's talk,
Yeah.
your classic hyperscalers, AWS, Azure, GCP, that kind of thing.
Uh-huh.
Um, what was interesting about them in 2025, given the backdrop, especially of all of this AI hype?
I think one thing that surprised me is when I was crunching the numbers at the end of the year for the number of cloud regions launched, was that the number was so low. So
Interesting,
yeah,
really
we've been
interesting. Yeah.
averaging pretty high, 20 to 30, like in the mid 20s, 30s a year since about 2017, 2018.
Hmm.
And last year, only 13 were launched, and this year, only 16 were launched. And that goes back to similar levels was 2015, 2016, so right at the very
Hmm.
beginning. And it peaked for number of regions launched in 2019 with over 40. So we're well below half of that these past 2 years, actually. So why is this happening? Um, we have to bring it up again, but it's probably AI. We're seeing it's clearer and clearer that they're refocusing Investment is there. Investment is high, but it's refocusing towards AI related data centers and
Interesting.
compute, and less
Right.
to building out or expanding footprints. Looking more at getting a quicker return on all this heavy investment than
Hmm.
building out a new region in, say, Africa. So we see like a refocus on the regions, the more developed regions like Europe, US, and parts of Asia.
My favorite map that you and your team have made over the past several years is one that's in the cloud product that we have, where you take a little slider and go from 2006 to the present day, or planned even, and just look at the scale of development of the hyperscalers, for one thing, of new cloud regions, but also the geographic spread. And so the need over the past several years that you talked about was to push those cloud instances further and further away from the core to those like harder to reach places. And you're saying now that AI training happens in very centralized, massive compute zones, so you're saying there's a push back to that center core. That is really
Right.
interesting.
Or
Wow.
at least as well, the center core and what is close to the center core.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where you see over the past 5 years where it has been pushing out and building out in like Latin America, Middle East, Africa, and different parts of Asia that we're still developing. Yeah, now we're seeing kind of a pullback, and especially in Africa, everything was put on hold. And this is where I worked the most, so I'm most familiar with, and all plans were kind of put on hold for this last year as the
Mm-hmm.
refocus was occurring. But now we are starting to see some activity again, so we'll see what happens there. But on the planning side, on the planned side, we do see there are 26 regions that are planned in the upcoming years. So maybe this is, and most likely it is, more tactical, kind of a short term repositioning, not a long term strategy. So we'll see the push back out to increasing the coverage of footprints in the coming years.
That is really interesting. And just kind of a side note, one of the conversations I had with our colleague Lane, and actually Paul, I think might have touched on this even a little bit more, is about how a bunch of the submarine cable projects for Africa kind of hit uh, delays, maybe even almost cancellations, because of the situation in Yemen and the Red Sea and whatnot. So those two things might be a little bit tied together, right? So.
Yeah, and definitely. And I there were delays, not canceling. 'Cause I think what they were doing is figuring out rerouting everything and building
Hmm. Hmm.
new networks basically around the problem points. So
Right. Yeah.
in
Paul brought that up. The
yeah,
terrestrial bypasses of the constrictions and whatnot. Yeah.
right, exactly. And this is all part of AI as well, because
Hmm.
several large AI companies are investing heavily in connectivity in the Middle East area. So
Hmm.
they're
Right.
funding a lot of this, or investing in the workarounds. So yeah, we're seeing a lot of that. And but we still saw in 2000 or in 2025, um, still a lot of growth. Well, some growth, more subdued, but still growth in Europe and Asia, where we've seen before, and Latin
Hmm.
America, surprisingly. I think the surprising area where we didn't see any new regions, and we haven't for the last year or two, is the Middle East. There are a
Hmm.
lot of plans for regions in the Middle East. So if we look at the planning side, a third, or maybe a little over a quarter, between a quarter and a third of all planned cloud regions are in the Middle East. So we're going to see a lot of activity there in the next year or two.
So, Patrick, one thing I often think about when I think about just the scale of hyperscaler expansion over the past several years, like you mentioned, is that it's hard to totally understand where CDNs still fit into this environment. If their reason for being was to spread caches of data around the world, and now the data lives all around the world. So what roles are CDNs still playing in this market?
Yeah, I think we're looking at two things though, because CDNs, the technology is here to stay. That's not
Mm-hmm.
changing. It's just, is it a profitable business, or,
Ah,
and
right. Yes,
here's where we've
that's always the question, isn't it?
yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
here's where we're seeing the change, is that the the biggest CDN, Akamai, and some of the other large ones, uh, you're seeing a shift as CDN revenues are not profitable, basically. Prices
Mm-hmm.
are dropping and OpEx is high. So, and companies want more for less. So it's been the last couple of years that, we've seen a drop off in profitability for CDNs. And you've seen the shift with all of these companies more to security. And now we see the
Mm-hmm.
shift to, well, maybe you saw it starting a couple of years ago, shift to cloud or cloud compute,
Right.
and a shift to now AI. So kind
Mm-hmm.
of searching for the profitability. And Akamai is a
Well, they
good
had some important assets in place. They have instances around the world. They have
right.
connectivity, and so it's just looking for a different way to leverage that, basically.
Yeah, and also, uh, you have the bigger companies that used to be their customers, like the AWSs, the
Mm-hmm.
Netflixes, etc., that have their own CDNs now. That's
Right.
basically,
Right.
it's a part of their network, so um, it's more efficient, network-wise, performance-wise, and cost-efficient to have your own CDN. And they do offer CDN services, like with AWS, not Netflix, but
Mm-hmm.
AWS. So what you're seeing is CDN services kind of a value add to something else. So that's what we see with
Mm-hmm.
Akamai, that shifting towards security and AI, to hopefully generate or have better profit. And you're seeing a lot of the other CDNs, like newish. I mean, not that new, but AWS, or the Chinese cloud providers, Alibaba, Tencent, etc.,
Mm-hmm.
that have their own CDNs. And now, with what happened starting about 2 years ago with Edgio and StackPath, that they went out of business, and basically uh, became parts of it because their customers go to Akamai. We're seeing these types of companies disappear, and new companies or new iterations of the same companies growing. So you see, like for Akamai, that they do offer, they started offering compute, and this is kind of an edge cloud is what we're looking at,
Mm-hmm.
a shift from kind of the core cloud to having a lot more compute on the edge, and that's how they're kind of marketing themselves. And this has shifted over this past year to AI, and building or having, kind of reconfiguring their networks to be AI inference platforms.
Mm.
So
So inference platforms, that's the edge kind of play. That makes
right,
sense. They're not going to
right,
try to compete on the training with the massive,
right.
GPUs and that sort of thing. Interesting.
And that's how they're built out anyway. So they
Hmm.
don't have a
Right.
central core. They do.
That was the
Um,
whole point, right? The
right,
CDN.
right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, and yeah, so we're seeing this shift to the cloud, and then we're seeing, kind of going back to the hyperscalers again. We talk about cloud and AI, or AI really, as it's something new, machine learning, etc., and that these are new AI data centers going in. But a lot of this GPU driven compute has existed in all of these cloud
Sure.
regions for,
Hmm.
for years. It's just now this refocus on this. So this is where we see the growth of a lot of new different companies, including from the CDNs to hyperscales, changing their strategies too. And so this is where it's getting kind of, the whole cloud and AI is very murky, and we're trying to kind of sort our way through it right now.
Yeah. Well, and you kind of bring up something that I've been saying often lately, which is that from the perspective of the kinds of things that we look at telegeography, AI is really just more of the same, just more of it, right? Like in
Right,
other
right,
words,
right.
more bandwidth, more data centers. You need maybe once we get to inferencing, being like, more important and popular for enterprise customers or something, then latency again becomes an issue. But these are always dials that the telecoms and everybody else in this business had. It's just a question of how it's going to be utilized. But it's not, to my view anyway, currently, like fundamentally changing the way we think about networks. It's just kind of where they're located is just as important as ever, and how much bandwidth is there, and what the latency and all that sort of thing is, right?
Right, and it's yeah. Also looking at latency, that latency, of course, is an issue, and we do see kind of refocusing in areas. And if you talk about AI, model training, etc., where we see a lot of the change in networks is not at the international level or the cross border level or the long haul level. It's really
Hmm.
campuses and metros. You
Right.
don't see the huge amount of traffic or growth outside of that yet.
This
So,
is a really important point. So I think that's something that we've been asked a lot, and I've struggled to sort of come up with data about it so far. I know that we will have some data on that soon when your round of research that you're doing right now is done, and transport networks, and not have some idea. But that thus far it doesn't seem like AI really has generated a massive bandwidth boom, right? It just has maybe the potential to do so very much, and we just kind of don't know when that's going to hit, when AI sort of as a enterprise and consumer technology really hits that stride. But for example, on my side of things, and the WAN manager survey, I asked WAN managers how important is AI to your office bandwidth demand. It's basically completely unimportant, right?
right,
Because
right,
if you're using a large language model or something, it's just text, or even if you're generating images, it's really is not. It's a drop in the bucket compared to the standard cloud compute things you were doing, and voice and video, and that sort of thing, right? So
right, right. And yeah, and a lot of this really is just cloud compute that's already been around. But yeah,
right.
I guess where we
I
see
should say,
network,
like, to your point, that I should say what I mean is on the long haul. Like, obviously,
right, right.
massive data center networks, and
Yep.
and even across metros and that sort of thing. That's where we're seeing it, just not between different parts of the globe.
Right, and there are, I mean, but there is investment by large, newer or AI companies, I should say, that
Hmm.
they're building out the networks, preparing for this, but we don't see it yet in terms of
Hmm.
differences in, because already just cloud compute, if we don't, we cloud compute, AI is part of that cloud compute, that
Right.
traffic.
Already. Yeah.
So,
Hmm.
right, already. So we can't break out what part of that is AI. So what is
Right.
the new growth? And in cloud traffic is growing, of course. And but like you say, also the networks of these companies are growing too. So, but we are. I
Hmm.
mean, we can track that as well. But what we're really focusing, or we really see the big difference is like dark fiber, metro dark fiber,
Hmm.
and at this level, not at the long haul part. Yeah, but
Right.
CDNs are positioning themselves to kind of assist, I think, in this kind of growth and offering
Hmm.
these types of edge compute services. And you see hyperscalers as well, like AWS building out local zones, which is very latency sensitive, smaller versions of the larger regions in areas where you need lower latency and better
Hmm.
compute. So we're seeing these changes. It's kind of all related.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense, and that kind of cues me up for where I wanted to sort of send us home, if you will, right? Which is something that I often ask my guests, especially when they're oriented to enterprise networks. Is the old enterprise network was very much a private network, right? And it was designed to pass securely traffic between, say, corporate offices, right? Very often with data centers on their own campuses and things like that, right? Over the past several years, I've kept seeing this like almost disillusion of the WAN, right? Where it's really becoming just a series of internet connections to cloud providers, and even at that, I've had some conversations lately about whether things like SD-WAN are even going to be relevant soon, because you're just accessing cloud assets that have their own security embedded, and you just need an internet pipe for that, right?
Right.
It seems to me like AI could just sort of speed all of that up, right? In the sense that whatever compute and connections you were doing that didn't involve some kind of cloud hyperscaler are going to, if it gets turned into an AI process instead, right? So wax philosophical for me, if you will, is really the whole internet just becoming a delivery device for AI, for cloud services, for things like that, and the kind of idea of this like network that belongs to a particular customer going away.
Um, I think this is what the carriers have feared for for a long time. That
Yeah, and some of them have been, it seems, preparing for that, so they might
yeah,
believe this as
yeah,
well, right? So yeah,
right, right. I mean, yes, that makes sense. That why not just like cloud, instead of using it on, your own computer or laptop, why don't you outsource your network to, third party like a hyperscaler, which had been in process anyway. But I think there were issues within the networks of like Microsoft Azure and Google and AWS, etc., that now are in better shape. Um,
hmm,
but I, I really do think, well, I'm talking more of network and not just enterprise network, but at a
sure,
network
yeah,
level, they all have to be interconnected. And one thing, and I'm sorry, this is kind of going a little bit away from what you asked, but we are seeing that even though we have this idea of hyperscaler networks all separate, we are seeing kind of this evolution of the hyperscaler networks interconnecting more and more with
oh.
each other. And
Well, actually, I
so
think
that,
that's perfectly in line with my question, because it
mm,
in many ways might hasten that then, right? Because again,
right.
you're just getting access onto their network of networks, and there's, you know what I mean? So yeah, yeah.
Right, right. Whereas before it seemed like they were more islands and they just wanted you on their network. Now we're
Hmm.
seeing a lot more interconnections and peering across uh, multiple hyperscalers. And you see a lot of these cloud launches, they're partnering with other clouds, or like
Right.
Oracle with Microsoft, or
And they
um,
have different strengths, so that makes sense. But,
correct.
most of the enterprises I talk to are multi-cloud, are using at least two or three of the big five or six, depending on what regions you're in,
Right.
right? So yeah,
And I think this was also drove a lot of this interconnection. Was they're like, we're also a, AWS and a Microsoft customer. We want to connect our networks. So
right.
there was kind of a push towards that that drive. So yeah, I mean, yeah, I do see that. And I mean, kind of stepping away from enterprise and looking at carriers as well. Also, as these networks build out, they can never cover everything. So you
Right.
always have the third party that does all other networks that are connected. So that's where I see kind of the role of the carriers, and also the role of CDNs as well, is kind of
Hmm.
hitting the anything that's off network for everybody else. So.
Well, I mean, you're the expert in this. You track enterprise services providers, like facilities based ones.
Mm.
Well, ballpark kind of figure, we track, I don't know, several hundred of them still are, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or more
Yeah,
than
yeah,
that,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, about
And
yeah,
and that's
we
and that's
track
just
2 to
a very
300, but yeah, a
yeah, and
small portion of.
that's for like multinational facilities based carriers. When you throw in
Right.
ISPs in our broadband database, we have thousands and thousands of ISPs. There's also all
Yep.
kinds of, in the US, we have hundreds of ILECs left, for example. There's always going to be this aspect of like, there's, thousands of networks. But in a way, I see them as all having the same purpose, which is to get you to AWS, right? You know what I
Yeah,
mean? Like,
right.
or there's you throw the content providers in there too, and it really is, you
Yeah.
know what I mean? So once you throw in Netflix and Meta, and as a sort of nerd joke that there was a time where the internet was this wild place, and people were running servers in their closet, and any interests you had, there was someone who had a blog about it, or there was an IRC internet relay chat about it or something.
Uh-huh.
And now, like, everything is like three websites, like X, Reddit, and Facebook, and they're
Right.
posting just screenshots of each other, basically, right?
Yeah.
So um and that's all of the content, the over
Consolidation.
the top stuff, but there's a sense in which that's reaching the infrastructure in a way,
Yeah. Oh, completely.
All right, so Patrick, we have this really interesting world that we're living in right now with AI. It's really hard to see how that's going to develop, how it turns into consumable tools. And I doubt that you have a clear idea, because I don't think anybody does, right? When I read people from the AI companies, it doesn't seem like they do necessarily. But that's going to impact the infrastructure, and that's what we're here to talk about. And so I'm wondering, to the extent, with that background, that we know there's a lot of things that we don't know, what are you looking out for in 2026 in the cloud and WAN world, basically?
Okay. If we're looking at cloud or cloud and AI, I think what we're going to be looking out for is a lot of this infrastructure actually being built and coming into service. We see a lot of
Good point.
planning,
Yeah.
but we haven't necessarily seen as much of the build side that maybe we thought we were going to see. Um, so even last year, when I was collecting the data to track these newer cloud companies or these GPU as a service companies that were
Mhm.
being built out, say like a CoreWeave, um, when I did research on what their actual infrastructure was, they had very little infrastructure. There were like 2 data centers, but 40 more were supposed
But
to
with a
come in the
plan,
next.
right?
Right,
Yeah.
with a plan. It's all with a plan. So, but it's true, over the last year, maybe 6 months, we have seen, like with CoreWeave, many more sites, but they're not proprietary builds, as I think they initially made it sound, but
Mm.
they're within existing colo facilities, etc. But at least there's infrastructure. So this is one thing we're going to be tracking, and I want to look at a lot closer, is what the actual builds are, who is building what where. And we do
Hmm.
see a lot of announcements by the hyperscalers for AI data centers, etc. And we are seeing some of this kind of being built and partnering, etc. And this is going to be the area of interest, I think, that we're really going to be digging into over the next like 3 or 4 months. And
Hmm.
this also kind of spills over into what's happening in developing markets like Africa. Does this mean that there's not going to be any new builds in Africa or Latin America, etc., as the refocus is on kind of these core data centers in the center? That'll be interesting to see, because there are other ideas floating out there. This is going way out there, but at a recent conference in Africa, them talking about starting to build a lot of these data centers, possibly AI data centers. This is rumor. This is not like super early stages, but building data centers to use all of the cheap power in Africa. And I'm like, where's the cheap power in Africa? Well, I guess solar. I guess
Yeah.
solar, but still, that infrastructure isn't there yet. So this is kind of something interesting to see. Or in the Middle East, when we're talking about AI, some of these
Hmm.
companies that Anthropic, etc., where we see these builds, they're building out these huge networks. But we have to see over these next 2 years, is there actually, traffic on these networks? Are these networks going to increase to grow? Where are these big data centers actually going to be built? When the planning stages are over and it's actually implemented. Maybe it's over the next year or so. We're going to see that. But I remember, just going back quickly to like SD-WAN, etc., talking about what was going to happen with SD-WAN. And it was like,
Yeah.
I don't know, almost a decade before you actually saw the actual implementation of a lot of this.
Hmm.
So I think that's what we're seeing with cloud as well, or I'm sorry, with AI. With AI.
Yeah, well, as I like to harp on this show, I did with John Hjembo, who we talked on some of the similar things here, is that all of this new technology, as we think about it, really requires old school infrastructure, and there are some serious limits to that, just like very practical ones, like how many companies are there out there that make the raw materials that you use to build data centers where these
Yeah.
and I'm not even talking about water cooled GPUs, but just like like I-beams and
Right.
transformers and things like that, right? So there are hard limits to that, but I do wonder, and it'll be really interesting to watch what you guys find out as you look into, like, say, the core weaves of the world, right? um whether AI will develop in such a way that it matters a lot where they're located beyond just power, you know what I mean? Like, and who knows what that means, like access to data sets of all kinds and things like this, when implementations of this really go into effect. If
Right.
your car or your refrigerator or whatever has to interact with AI all the time, that's not just inferencing, but creating data lakes that have to be who knows, like that's the
Right.
thing. It's gonna be really interesting to see how that impacts uh the actual boots on the ground, so to speak. Right. So
Yep. Yeah. Tracking the infrastructure is the fun part of all this. Cuts through all of the marketing hype.
well, and that's the other thing too, right? Is that will this infrastructure that they're planning for actually be necessary? That's hard to know either.
Right.
Right. You know
Right.
what I mean?
Right.
So yeah, I
And
think
that's
it's gonna
in
be. Yeah.
yeah, that's a good kind of topic with water cooled GPUs, that we're finding that in some places it's so expensive and so hard. They may be in Africa, this is Africa, ready for AI style racks, but nobody's paying for them or buying them yet. So,
Right.
they don't want that. They want the cheap air cooled because it's
Hmm.
more, cost efficient. But once again, that's more in Africa, not in
Right.
Europe or the US.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think it's going to keep us busy certainly the next year. It's going to be I think a very active one for us as analysts. So
I agree.
excellent. All right. Well, thank you, Patrick, for the insights, and enjoy your time in Japan. Once again, it's really cool that we could do this
Super
across
cool.
what is it, a 14-hour time zone difference, something like that. So
Yeah. Yeah. 14 hours. Crazy.
yeah,
It's good.
excellent. All
All
right.
right,
Well,
man.
thank you,
Well,
sir.
thank you. I'll talk to you later, Greg.
Cheers. Thanks for listening. TeleGeography Explains the Internet comes from the experts here at TeleGeography. It's edited and produced by Jane Miller, and it's hosted by me, Greg Bryan. And I also wrote that theme song you're listening to right now. To learn more about our data, jump over to telegeography.com, and we'll see you on the internet.